The arena goes dark. A single spotlight hits the center of the ring. The announcer steps forward, the microphone crackles, the crowd falls silent.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's contest is scheduled for 5 rounds. In one corner, a challenge that has been leveled at Islamic scripture for decades. In the other, a defense built not on blind faith, but on evidence, scholarship, and the testimony of scientists who had no reason to be convinced. Introducing first, fighting out of the red corner, armed with the full weight of secular scrutiny, historical analysis, and every reasonable objection a reasonable mind can raise, representing the skeptic position, David Stone, and his opponent, fighting out of the blue corner, carrying 14 centuries of Quranic verse, the consensus of classical Islamic scholarship, and the findings of the world's leading embryologists, representing the Muslim position, Yusuf al-Haq. You are ringside. The bell is about to ring, and this question, whether a 7th century text accurately described the stages of human embryonic development before any human being had the tools to observe them, has been waiting for someone to settle it. Watch carefully. Round 1. David Stone comes out fast. His argument is direct. He wastes no time. The claim being made by the Muslim position, Stone says, is extraordinary. It is the claim that the Quran describes human embryonic development with scientific accuracy that modern embryology only confirmed in the 20th century. But this is a 7th century text. The people of 7th century Arabia did not have microscopes. They could not see inside the womb. They had no laboratory, no instruments, no systematic biology. So either the Quran borrowed from Greek physicians, men like Galen and Aristotle, who had been studying the human body for centuries before Islam existed, or the descriptions are vague enough that any resemblance to real embryology is the product of motivated interpretation. Stone plants his feet. There is nothing miraculous here, he says. There are only 2 options: borrowing or projection. Clean, confident. Stone lands round 1 well. Yusuf al-Haq steps forward and raises a single question. What did the Greeks actually say? Aristotle, one of the greatest minds in the history of human thought, believed the embryo formed from menstrual blood animated by male semen. The male provided the form, the female provided the raw matter. He believed the soul gave shape to the organism, and without it, the biological material was inert. His embryology dominated Western thinking for nearly 2,000 years. Galen, the Roman physician whose authority over medicine remained largely unquestioned until the 16th century, was more detailed, but his sequence of development does not match the modern record. He misidentified which tissues form first. He got the roles of different structures wrong. His framework was the most advanced of its time, and it was still significantly incorrect. Al-Haq turns to face Stone directly. If the Quran simply borrowed from the Greeks, it would carry the same mistakes the Greeks made. That is how borrowed knowledge travels. The errors come with it. The Quran does not repeat those errors. Al-Haq wins round 1 on points. Round 2, Stone adjusts. He comes in with a tighter argument. Grant me, Stone says, that the Quran does not match Aristotle word for word. I will accept that. But the descriptions in the Quran are still loose enough to be stretched onto almost anything. Words like clot and chewed lump. These are evocative images. They are not clinical observations. If you are determined to find a correspondence between ancient poetic language and modern biological stages, you will find one. The entire comparison is being driven by the answer Yusuf al-Haq has already decided he wants to reach. Stone points at the crowd. Show me a description specific enough that it could actually be proven wrong, he says. Until then, this is not evidence. It is confirmation bias. The crowd responds. This is a sharper punch, and the skeptic knows it. Al-Haq steps to the center of the ring and calls his first witness. Keith Moore was a professor of anatomy at the University of Toronto. He wrote The Developing Human, one of the most widely used embryology textbooks in medical education worldwide. He was not a Muslim. He had no theological stake in the outcome. He was a scientist with a career built on absorption, detestable biology. In 1981, he was presented with the Quranic descriptions of embryonic development and asked to evaluate them against the modern scientific record. He did not dismiss them. He said they were remarkable. Al-Haq does not stop there. Moore went further. He demonstrated the mudghah comparison, the Quranic description of the embryo resembling a chewed lump of flesh, by taking a piece of clay, placing it in his mouth, biting down, removing it, and holding it next to a photograph of a 28-day-old human embryo. The surface ridges, the bite mark indentations, the irregular bumps along the back where the somites are forming. The shapes matched. This is not the Muslim position stretching a metaphor, Al-Haq says. This is a professor of anatomy performing a physical comparison and confirming the accuracy of the description with his own hands. Round 2 goes to Al-Haq. Round 3. Stone has been preparing for Keith Moore. He comes forward without hesitation. Moore, Stone says, was working alongside Muslim scholars who framed the entire inquiry. He was shown the embryology and the Quranic verses together, in a context designed to highlight connections. The exercise was set up to produce agreement. And Stone points out that Moore's endorsement does not appear prominently in later editions of his textbook, which suggests that as academic scrutiny increased, Moore himself pulled back from the stronger claims. One impressed scientist, in one curated context, is not scientific consensus. Stone lands this cleanly. The blue corner absorbs it without going down. Al-Haq takes the punch, acknowledges it, and does not deny that Moore's context deserves scrutiny. Then Al-Haq brings in 2 more witnesses. TVN Prasad co-authored The Developing Human with Moore. He reviewed the same Quranic descriptions independently. He concluded that the correspondence between the ancient text and the modern scientific record went beyond what any observer in 7th century Arabia could have arrived at through direct examination. His judgment was independent of Moore's and came from the same professional foundation, developmental biology, not theology. Maurice Bucaille was a French surgeon. He spent years doing something unusual, systematically comparing the scriptural texts of the world's major religions against the findings of modern science. He was not a Muslim when he began. He was not looking for miracles. He was specifically looking for contradictions. In the Bible, the Quran, and science, he concluded that the Quranic account of human development contains no descriptions that are contradicted by what we now know to be biologically true. Al-Haq faces Stone across the ring. 3 witnesses, he says. None of them Muslim when they first examined the question. All 3 arriving at the same place. Round 3 goes decisively to Al-Haq. Round 4. Stone raises a technical objection. He has done his reading, and he knows the developmental biology. The Quran states that after the mudghah stage, bones are formed and then clothed with flesh. But modern embryology shows that the cells which become bone and the cells which become muscle arise at almost exactly the same time from the same mesenchymal tissue. There is no clean interval where the skeleton appears complete before muscle begins. The sequence Stone describes, he says, is not what embryology actually records. This is not vagueness. This is a specific error. Stone lands a precise punch, and the crowd feels it. Al-Haq responds with equal precision. While it is true that precursor cells for bone and muscle appear in the embryo at similar times, the cartilaginous skeleton, the structural framework around which the body organizes itself, forms and consolidates before the muscular tissue anchors and wraps around it. The body is scaffolded first, then it is clothed. Muscle does not organize itself around an empty space. The structural shape must exist before the covering can follow. In the developmental sense that matters, the sequence by which the body's visible form emerges, the Quran's description is sequentially correct. Stone's technical punch falls short of the mark. Round 4 goes to Al-Haq. Round 5, championship round. Stone comes forward with everything he has held back. He raises his voice for the first time in the fight. Everything Yusuf Al-Haq has presented tonight, Stone says, is analysis done in reverse. Scientists discovered the actual stages of embryonic development in the modern era. Then, afterwards, the Muslim position looked back at the Quran and found language that could be matched to those stages. If the Quran had described development in a completely different order,
someone would have found a way to make that fit too. The entire practice of reading ancient religious texts as scientific documents is methodologically backwards. You are finding patterns because you are searching for them. You are working from conclusion to evidence, not from evidence to conclusion. That is not discovery. That is confirmation dressed up as proof. The arena is on its feet. This is the real fight. This is the argument that has ended other debates. Al-Haq walks to the center of the ring and answers quietly. The charge of motivated interpretation is serious. It deserves a serious answer. And the answer is not that every claimed scientific reference in every ancient text is valid, because most are not, and the Muslim position does not claim otherwise. The answer is that the Quran's descriptions are specific enough to have been wrong in verifiable ways. If the Quran had described the embryo forming from blood alone, as Aristotle said, that would be a falsifiable error. If it had placed the flesh stage before the bone stage, that would be wrong. If it had described a single undifferentiated transformation with no distinct stages, that would contradict what we observe. If it had said the embryo resembles something angular or rigid in the early weeks instead of something rounded and clinging, that would be wrong. The sequence given, drop of mixed fluid, clinging organism, chewed lump shape, bones, flesh over bones, could have been wrong in 100 different ways. It is not wrong. And Keith Moore, Stone's own witness turned against him, did not arrive at his conclusion by reading the Quran and hunting for validation. He arrived at it by spending decades learning the embryology first, and then being shown the text and recognizing what he already understood to be true. That is not finding what you are looking for. That is recognizing what was already there. The final bell sounds. You watched 5 rounds from ringside. You saw David Stone land real, serious, well-constructed punches. You saw Yusuf Al-Haq absorb every one of them without pretending they did not connect, and respond each time with named scholars, reproducible comparisons, and a specific, falsifiable sequence that centuries of scrutiny have not overturned. The judges scored this fight clearly. But this is not the end of the questions. Stone's challenges were not cheap shots. They were honest, and any person thinking seriously about this topic should continue to examine them. What cannot be walked away from is the record, a 7th century text, an unlettered man, a society with no tradition of embryological study, descriptions of the stages of human development, with a sequence and a specificity that the best educated scientific minds of that era did not possess. Someone told you that everything you are started as a clot of blood. You just watched 5 rounds of the strongest arguments against that claim. Now decide which corner you are walking out.